Depends
fine?
on you. Yeah.
This is okay. Yeah, okay. Let's sit over here. Okay, so if you could kindly explain what your role is and a little bit about your party.
Yes. Well, I'm a member of Parliament here in Denmark for the Alternative. I'm spokesperson on basically everything outside of Denmark, on EU policy, global policy, defense, security, climate. The Alternative is a fairly new party. We started in 27th of November 13.
Okay.
As a totally new initiative, we were a group of people saying we need to renew the democratic contract there is. So we came up with basically an idea for a platform, political platform, saying there's three essential crises that politics today has to answer. First of all, the climate crisis, which will change everything as we know it. I mean, our way of producing, our way of working, living, traveling, owning, everything has to change. And that is for us really the central question today. But also what we call the crisis of the system as we know it. And that's interesting when you talk about Nordic welfare, because normally in the Nordic country we say we have public sector can go in and solve the problems. As we see them today, we need to find new ways of solving the problems we stand with. We don't believe the private sector, total free markets can solve anything, but we don't think either that with the challenges we're facing today, automation of workplaces, the climate, everything, that we can actually just solve them as we used to do in the industrial society. But also the NGO, the civil society cannot do it itself. So we talk a lot about this fourth sector. How can we organize ourselves in new ways? How can we actually build up new systems for new time? And thirdly, what we came up with was what we call the empathy crisis. That we think there is a lack of empathy in society, in the world as we know it. You see it very visible with the whole refugee situation in the world, with 65 million people on refugees in the world. And what we talk about here in Europe, especially the richer part of Europe, is how to close our borders. US clearly as well with the wall to Mexico, and I mean it's actually a lack of empathy that we are here together on this planet Earth. But we also see it in our small little wonderful country of Denmark, which is, I mean, the whole system we have of social security, healthcare, education is built on that we have a shared understanding of each other and wanting to do something for each other. But now the debate is much more, okay, the unemployed are lazy, or the refugees are coming taking everything, or it's also the people in the countryside who doesn't want to travel as much as the rest of us, or the people in the cities are used to it. I mean, there's really this lack of empathy, and how can we recreate an understanding among us? So we came up with this and said, we don't have a political program, it's up to you to create it. And so it's based on this whole idea of political project as co-creation.
Okay, so how would you differentiate your party from the traditional social democratic parties in Denmark? Because this third way approach has been in existence for about 100 years or so what is the difference?
For us it's about that we are We don't believe in ideologies. We don't believe in looking backwards, saying we solved it like this. We are a very progressive party and think that we should dare experiment much more, try new things. I mean, try with the universal basic income. What does it mean? How can we make tests of these things? Where what you see traditionally, especially in Scandinavia, with the social democratic parties, are that they are actually quite conservatives because they created the way of doing things fantastically 100 years ago.
Yes.
But we are in a new time. I mean, the change we're seeing now, as I see it, is as big as when we went from agricultural societies to industrial societies. Now we're going from industrial societies into something else.
Yes.
So we also have to reinvent
Yes. I agree.
the way of we doing things. So that is like for us the major thing, and also that you're quite often on the more left wing in political spectrum in Europe have this a bit the fear of the private market, a fear of entrepreneurs, and what we say is we all need to be entrepreneurs today. We all need to be much more entrepreneurial. Even though we're working in public sector, we need to be entrepreneurs with creating new things, and that is also a bit. Yes.
So I've done some communication with InHitsList, and I, from what I understand, that they are the Red-Green Alliance. So how do you differentiate your politics from those?
We work a lot together, first of all, I have to say. I have great respect for them. But in English they call themselves Red-Green Alliance. It is an alliance of left-wing parties created back in late 80s. So it's all socialist, Workers' Party, and different smaller list. And they have a very traditional socialist approach, which we don't share necessarily. I mean, we I would say as much as quite often we share the aim or the goal,
Sure.
but we have different ways of coming there.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, when you consider the Democratic Party in the States, I think there's a common connection between the more grassroots element of our party, the sort of Bernie Sanders supporters, and probably what you guys stand for. And it's interesting. I was watching a Vox interview with Hillary Clinton about universal basic income herself. She was actually considering making that part of her platform in 2016.
Yes.
She was going to call it Alaska for America, but it didn't go through. So as a concrete step that we could take, that was actually one of my questions. Do you think, for example, Aarhus could start a test for universal basic income, or what's your plan?
Totally. I mean, what we say is we need to dare to experiment much more in society, also with something like basic income. It could be good to take a more urban area and then take a more rural area, like the south of Zealand or Holland. So yeah, we have to dare to experiment. Because I don't believe in just coming up with a solution on my desk and saying this will work in reality. Yeah. I mean, we have to go out and test it and say, what is the right way of constructing a universal basic income? I mean, if you know about this, I mean, there's so many schools of the right way of doing it.
Right.
And me, I have a background as a designer, I'm a creative person, and I'm used to testing and trying and not coming up just with answers.
That's good to know. Right, if I may, just for our time consideration, so how do you see the triple bottom line? Like, how, to someone who's never heard of such a thing, what is the triple bottom line?
It's something we came out with a report this summer because we've been talking about this all the time, that we need to not just measure ourselves in economics. Normally in the world right now we have the BNP, and that's how we calculate everything. How rich are we? Also, that's being who are successful. What is our growth rates? That is successful. But what we see in many of the countries with very high economic growth is also that they have a very high inequality, for example.
Yeah.
That doesn't create a good society. If there's inequality, there's also tensions. Tensions is not good because we all like actually to live in an harmonious society. So what we said is instead of just focusing on growing on the economic bottom line, we need to have a triple bottom line. And many, successful companies today actually do. But we try to say that if we do that as a state, have different indicators on the green bottom line. I mean, how much are we recycling of our resources? What is our energy consumption, so forth. But also the social bottom. I mean, are we creating more happy people? I mean, what about loneliness? I mean, it's a big problem in Danish society. I mean, you're visiting here, you know, we have a good welfare state, you get paid for, but actually we have a lot of young people who feel lonely. And that's not good for society either if we want strong entrepreneurial people. But of course there's also the economics. I mean, but we need it to be that finance is not the goal. It's a tool to reach the goal of a balanced green and social development. So in a way we're saying one thing is the tool, the two others are the actual goal of things.
Okay, so I can immediately see the resistance from more right-wing forces that would say,
yes.
well, we don't want to live in a society that's necessarily harmonious because we want to live in a society that's free. So what is your answer to win these types of people over who would wish for more money in their own pockets and more tax cuts of the welfare state?
First of all, I would say that I want a free society as well, but my freedom isn't worth anything if it comes on if I'm restraining other people at the same time, and that's what we're doing right now with the system we have. Also, we have to see at these issues globally. I mean, I think the time when you could look at policy and say we have foreign policy and we have domestic policy, I mean, those days are over.
Yeah, that is true.
Everything is global policy.
That is true.
Because of the digitalization, because of everything, we live in one world.
Right.
So when we look at that, we see, okay, we have, for example, for Europe, we have a continent just south of Europe called Africa.
Right.
They need to develop financially.
Right.
They need to gain an economic that makes life a good life. I mean, because we can see in Europe after the Second World War, you had the economic growth and the quality of life were actually following each other. But only till about 72. Since then, our quality has been the same, but the economic growth since 72 has been extreme. So we have to question our this idea we have that economic growth is necessary, because what do we need? I mean, in I know there's a lot of inequality in US, but if you look at the Danish society, we see a growing inequality, but still, you look at Denmark as such, we are quite rich. We are a wealthy country. We have a lot of things. We need to redistribute some, but we could. It won't make us a better society to get the third car or the second television or one more travel to Thailand, which will cost us carbon footprint, which is out of this world. So actually what we're saying is also maybe we shouldn't have economic growth in Denmark. Maybe that's not what we need right now. Maybe it's something else. Also to leave room, for example, for many of the African states that need to grow in the quality of life.
But once again, I would caution that, especially in the constituency that I'm hoping to win in, there are a lot of people who say, hold on, I should be able to have as many cars as I want. Why are you trying to dictate to me my standard of living? How do you change the culture?
But for me, it's not a question about dictating. For me, it's a question about saying, if we truly want to solve the problems we're facing, then we need to look at this globally. We need to think about the other. Getting back to it's actually the crisis of empathy I'm talking about. Why do you need a third car or fifth or sixth or whatever you want when you're then taking that opportunity away from something else? I mean, I think we have to question, and sometimes people get very angry with me when I say that, also in my constituency. I say we need to question what we really need to have a good life. I need to question that myself. I mean, I come from the fashion industry. I mean, I'm used to living on a total system of all the time thinking new. But we have to question ourselves. What is the cost? And what we see with the climate change right now, what we see with with 65 million people moving around the world, what tensions and what challenges that's creating for us, then we need to do something about it. And again, I don't have a freedom here if all of a sudden, because of climate changes, we're going to see 200 million people, refugees. I mean, we cannot handle 2.5 million that comes to Europe right now. That come in the last 3 years. We don't know how to handle this in Europe. How the hell should we handle it?
Well, I think there's a good way, and that's maybe the U.S. should step up. After all, I mean, you can make arguments about the direct links between the refugee crisis and, for example, the invasions, the attacks against Libya and Syria and Iraq, with U.S. presence in that region with the UK. So I would argue that we need to step up our intake of refugees. I mean, that would be one huge way of assuaging the problem. But moving on for the sake of time, do you have a concrete proposal on, for example, what it is to do to, for example, reduce the cost of going to a dentist here? Apparently, that's a very high cost for most people, despite the welfare state.
We don't have we have said actually that we want to work towards it being part of the universal healthcare. So of course it costs a lot of money. It's very expensive. And what we said is maybe we have to look at again how are we organizing? We don't necessarily believe we have to pay more taxes, but we need to organize the systems in new ways.
Sure.
And also question the economic base in the sector like dentists. They earn a lot of money.
Yeah, sure.
So we need to look at the system and what that has been proposed that could be a way. Is do we have to charge some people for going to the doctor to get more money into the big big bag to make dentist free? But what is very hard in Denmark, because we have a system as well, and it's an old system, is to make changes in that system, because all of a sudden people will say, you're taking something away from us. Why do we need to pay more here? Right now in Denmark, we have given a lot of tax cuts to companies, to the highest income people. And we want to actually say we need to get those money back, which we shouldn't. And that would, again, create the finances we need, for example, for the dentist.
Okay, so from what I understand, the government here is making tax cuts and using an argument of austerity to some degree to make these possible. Now, do you believe having access to the state coffers and the balance sheet, does this country need tax cuts?
No.
Not at all. You think so?
I think we need reform of our tax system. I mean, I would like us to have a tax system much more based on resource taxes, wealth taxes, instead of taxing income so much. Because it's not the income. In Denmark, we don't have these outrageous incomes like we do in the US. I mean, even the ones with the very high incomes, I mean, it's not that it's not what's making the big inequality in society. It's something else. So what we say is actually, could we start taxing use of resources, carbon, CO2 taxes, carbon taxes, also the wealth. I mean that some people generate and create and give on in closed loop. How can we tax that instead? We don't need tax cuts as we see them.
I was talking with members of Enhedslisten about tax havens, and I was wondering if, a gentleman named Jonas Guifelt, and I was wondering, does Alternative have a policy on tax evasion and tax havens abroad?
Yes, we do. First of all, we're saying it's something we need to solve internationally, and there we say EU is the answer to do something, because it's too difficult for in a global economy as we have, for one country like Denmark to do something about this is impossible. But when we go together as the EU, 28 now, soon 27, we have a strength to do something about it. So what we're saying is we have to work through the institutions we know to make something about it. Also because you know that if we look at the tax haven, the money that is hidden in tax havens, I mean, that could finance the whole all 17 SDGs. I mean, you could take that money directly out, and it would actually
All 17 what?
Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, and we let people hide money away from the rest of us. I mean, it's
Yeah, I mean, I guess at every step of the way, you hear the conservative argument saying, well, why shouldn't I be able to repatriate my funds where I please? It's my money.
Yes, but you also make the money in some countries. I mean, I'm sorry, here in Denmark, for example, we are financing good infrastructure, good education, healthy people that go to work every day. And companies should be part of also financing that. If you take some of the developing countries, that's where they get their resources. I mean, that their metals, the minerals they need, and they just go down there and they take the minerals out of the country and they leave.
That's right.
I mean, that's where you have to say, I mean, if you make money, I don't mind people making money. I don't mind people making a lot of money. I mean, I'm not...
Sure, of course.
Fine, it's fun to make money.
Yeah.
It's also a way of saying, okay, I have a success in creating something, but you need to pay back to where you get it. You need to pay back to the collective as well.
Can I suggest that we move a little bit
Yes,
further away?
you can indeed.
So we're going to move. So to the curious audience, we have moved for the sole purpose of avoiding the sounds of coffee grinders. So with that said, let's continue. So back to the policy that I was talking about that Enhedslisten had advanced about tax havens, and it seems like you guys have a very well-developed one too. And I'm wondering, when we're talking about internationalism and we're talking about EU policing, you know, the EU has made at least vocal attempts to try and put out an EU black list of tax havens, and the OECD engages in the same sort of behavior. But I'm curious to know, what can, for example, the U.S. Democratic Party offer your organization in terms of working together to try and tackle some of these problems?
But I think first of all we have to accept that we need international organizations to do that.
Yeah, sure, definitely.
And the US has to accept that as well.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
I mean, we have taken some steps in EU. I mean, I don't think we have done enough at all. I mean, there should even be some EU countries on that list, which it's not. But I think that the work being done in OECD, for example, is very good because it actually... There's been a funny change in OECD the last couple of years. I don't know how much you know the organization, but it actually has become quite interesting organization. I mean, I thought it was all the bad guys in the beginning, and then I've gone down to some meetings now, and I can see that they're actually saying, okay, we need to make the system international. We need to say that nobody can hide their money. I think we need in EU, and maybe it should be on a bigger scale, having some kind of common tax level for businesses, so we're not competing on going on the 0% or even worse. I mean, that's one way of doing it, is making some agreement or having an alignment of company taxes. But I also think we need to put in place and the whole resource taxes on the international scale as well, because first of all, we need everyone needs to reduce CO2 output. So if we start taxing that internationally, we get money to also fund some of that adaptation we need to do in some developed countries that need us to do that. And also the whole resource taxes system, which will force companies to pay taxes for the resources they're taking out of countries. But again, that also needs to be agreed on an international scale. And I think it would be wonderful if the US Democratic Party would work for that, because that would also mean that the US has to accept that there is international organizations that have some real power.
Agreed. Very much agreed. Very much agreed. And what I was curious to know is, okay, so now that we've broached the topic of the EU,
yes,
does the Alternative support the Danish membership into the European Union? That's the first one.
Big time, yes.
Okay, good. Do you guys believe in EU integration? Furthering, do you believe in, for example, a harmonized tax structure across federalized Europe?
In a way, yes. But I think it's important to say that there's many ways of understanding federal Europe. I don't believe in a federal Europe like the US. Again, what would we do if we created it today? I think we need to make a further integration on some parts. And on other parts, I believe very much in local governance. I mean, but that is also even more local than state level. That's cities, it's regions. So I think we need to all the time focusing on where can we best solve the issue. Is it on EU? Is it national? Or is it local? And we need to really focus on all the time placing the power as close to the problem that has to be solved as possible.
Is there a digital solution to that?
But for example, when we're talking taxes, I mean, I think we need to solve it together. We also need to look at the social structures in Europe, and that is a federal way of thinking. I mean, the whole idea of the social pillar that's being discussed right now, and even the social protocol in EU, would give individual citizen rights and not the states. So that is also a federal way.
Do you believe that there's a digital solution? Like, for example, the Icelandic and European pirate parties, they advocate more democratic involvement from constituencies, say, on the internet. Something, for example, the German pirate party advocated was liquid democracy. So what kind of ideas does the Alternative have in that regard?
Again, first of all, our main line is experiment. Because I mean, I've been talking a lot to both the European pirates, the Icelandic pirates. I've been talking to Podemos, to Comun, to some guys from democratic parties as well. We've been discussing this even with the Taiwanese political parties, and nobody has come up with the right solutions to how to do things.
Sure.
So we need to experiment, and we need to dare to make mistakes. I mean, that's the first step. I think there's a big problem in saying that the digital solutions are the solutions, because the big problem right now, when we look at all the different tools are for democracy online, it's a very linear way of thinking. You comment on something, I comment on something, to comment on something. When you sit, I mean, the way we are doing politics and creating our political programming in the Alternative is through laboratories, which is basically design workshops. It's not where you sit in lines and listen to a person standing talking. It's by sitting around the table and actually prototyping and being engaged with each other. So what we have said until now is everything that goes on online has to go on offline as well. Because there happens something when we sit here together.
Yes.
We can do something together that we cannot yet, or maybe we will never be able to do it online. But on the other hand, you can engage a lot bigger crowd online.
Yes.
So we are also using online tools. I mean, we sometimes when we have questions in Parliament and we're discussing them in our group and we're saying there's pros and cons. We don't really, I mean, maybe we don't agree, or maybe it's just there's so many pros and cons we think. Then we send it out to all the members of the party and say, what should we vote here? And then they have 3 days to vote. Then we do what they say. But we don't do it on everything, because politics is also about discussing. It's not, I mean, the big problem with many digital tools I've seen so far is it comes down to the voting. It's a yes or no. And for me, that is very poor politics. Okay. Politics is not just about deciding on yes or no. It's also about creating the right answers, but also come up with the right questions.
Sure.
And so I think we need to take that step further, that we don't see politics as just a voting thing. I mean, democracy and politics is also about what happens when you come together to discuss things and creating things.
I wanted to share the remaining of our time about the green policies of your party. So, first of all, how do you see the state of affairs in Denmark now? What are the changes that are occurring? And basically, what can we do to change these things?
I mean, Denmark is very well developed when it comes to energy policy, for example. We have been very good at developing, and there's a lot in windmill technologies, and we're very far ahead of many other countries in that sense. But what's happening right now is we have some major setbacks. and the rest of the world is moving ahead. And again, coming back to my experiment idea and my love of experiments, I mean, Denmark is a perfect kind of country to actually experiment with new things because we have a size which is, I mean, you can easily do things and then you can scale up for other places. So what we need first of all is to have some much higher ambitions. I mean, I think we need to say actually how can we go into 100% renewable energy when it comes to electricity in 30? How can we be 100% renewable energies in 2040? How can we phase out fossil cars in 2025? We can do all these things if we decide to do it. If we said today, in 2025, it's no longer possible to buy a new fossil car. First of all, the producers of electric car will begin to find Denmark interesting. At the same time, we can begin to tax the fossil cars higher, taking taxes off electric cars. We can make it easier for example, in cities like Aarhus, only allowing electric cars, so we don't have the air pollution which also comes with the diesel cars. And you will see private companies begin to roll out the infrastructures we need in the country for example electric cars. But we need to plan these things. If we don't give it time, because 2025 sometimes there's some of the really green warriors who say, oh, it's too late, we need to abolish all fossil cars today. I say no, we need to make the steps so we can follow, but we need to be so ambitious so we all the time pushed a bit further and we actually think we could. Also what we need to begin to think about is our consumption here. I mean, what are we consuming? Because one thing is that we're good with green energy, we have a high percentage of renewable energies in Denmark, but we also have one of the highest footprints if you look at our consumption. I think it's 3.4 planets we needed everybody live like Danes, or something like that. Because first of all the pigs going around here in Denmark eating. I mean, we import soya from South America. We buy things, a lot of things, and we're not very good at recycling. So we need to begin to actually look very critical at our agricultural businesses. And say we need to cut down on the animal productions and scale up the vegetable production instead. We need to look at our way of consuming. I mean, we want to put a tax on for example, beef, because we need to begin to realize what it means that because we are so rich as we are, people eat a lot of meat. And maybe it doesn't mean anything that if I ate meat that I took a steak, but when we're doing it all of us, all the time, every day, then we see the footprint on our planet. So what we say with our green policy is we need to work on international scale, on a national scale, but also on a regional and a personal scale. Because of course we need to change the system and the structures, but we also need to change things in our way of working and dealing with this on a personal scale.
Okay. I just, I would hope that the very first policy I could enact, if I were given the office, would to sign more agreements with Nordic countries such as Denmark, to have more investment coming our way to help us develop a green economy in New Jersey. I mean, New Jersey's population is roughly the size of Sweden. So, and Denmark is actually larger than New Jersey. So it's interesting to me when people think that we can't scale up a lot of the provisions that you're talking about. And I'm curious to know what you think about that. But before that, I would say, if elected, if put into a position where we could have an influence, I would really love to have more Danish investment into our society. Because, American corporations such as, for example, Goldman Sachs, they have no problem investing in Dong Energy, the public utility in Denmark. If there's an ongoing grievance that you have with that corporation, I mean, I don't know if they've done anything wrong or right, but we have the authority in America to hold them accountable if something has gone wrong.
I mean, I would say nothing has gone wrong in the sense that they've given a freedom because we sold up our common infrastructure. And for me, that's a problem. It's not so much one company or the other company. For me, it's a question about infrastructure as energy is. I think it should be on common hand.
Yes, I agree.
I think it's important that we have that together because you see it in some countries where for example, water resources all of a sudden is owned by private companies. I mean, for me, we have a right to clean water, all
Sure.
of us.
I was asking.
Yeah. So what I think we should do, and that could also be from a state like New Jersey and Denmark together, begin to think of how do we give the sentiment to invest greener and also invest greener across borders. I mean, it would be extremely interesting to say. I mean, if a Danish company is working on I know we have a very good company working on recycling of plastic resources, and I know you have a lot of plastic.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And if that could be developed together, I mean, if that could be a common investment, saying, oh yeah, we develop this. It's private companies going and say, okay, there's a resource here. We can actually do something to recycle this. It's good for the environment. It creates jobs.
Yes.
And
100%.
I mean, that is not something. I mean, we shouldn't sell. As right now, they're importing used plastic from Canada to recycle it in northern Jutland. I mean, why not make businesses across countries as well?
100% agree. Okay, so let's see. How much, have you still got a few minutes left?
Yeah.
Okay.
10 minutes.
I'm curious to know, for example, the Paris Climate Accord that the U.S. withdrew from. Is it a policy that was flawed, or is it a step in the right direction, or should we create a new policy? How do you see this accord?
It was a major and fantastic step the world took with the Paris Agreement. Would I have wanted it more ambitious? Yes. I would have liked it to also include that it was a phase out of fossil production. I mean, fossil resources. I mean, but things like that is not in it. But the Paris Agreement, what it is, it's a framework. And now it's up to us to put the right things in. I was in Bonn for the COP 23 this fall, and what the talk was about there is what do we put in it? How do we actually measure each other on all these different things? And that's an important thing right now. So Paris Agreement is fantastic, and we should protect it and develop it and work with it. But again, also let it be. I mean, not the where we meet. I mean, it's not the top top level we can do. It's the bottom. And we have to remember what it says as well, because I mean, it actually the Paris Agreement only says that we need to cut so we don't use more. We don't see a temperature rise more than 1.5 degree maximum too. I think people have forgotten about the 1.5 already and then going for the 2 degrees, which is too much.
But there's still time to solve these problems.
There's time to solve this, and especially what we need to understand is we need to act now because we have the agreement. And for example, we are proposing in Danish Parliament that we make a plan for phasing out our whole oil industry, oil and gas industry, because we can do it.
But I mean, for example, yesterday I was reading about the agricultural voters who voted for Donald Trump after voting for the Democratic Party for years. They were promised subsidies to help change over to the green economy, and now we're seeing that, for example, a lot of these companies are going bankrupt, and that there are divergent interests. Like, for example, a Pennsylvania steel mill a gas and oil refinery is suffering because of this excess production of biofuels. So how do we keep everyone essentially still employed without making major disruptions to the global economy and not affecting, say, developing countries with this transfer from one sort of fossil fuel economy to a green economy? How would you create this transfer period? Because I would argue a lot of people probably lose their jobs if.
But yes, but I don't think necessarily the economy will be smaller, and that's why we also said. I mean, we proposed that we do a work week of 30 hours instead of 37.5. Say let's share the work there is.
Yeah. I mean, of course, I'm on board. I'm just,
So we need, and that is, I think, the very difficult thing right now is we need to understand that it's a paradigm shift we're standing in. it is as big as going from being agricultural to industrial. Now we have to make that change again.
Yeah.
So we cannot hold on to systems and saying we used to do like this, but we want to get over here, but we don't dare make the change. We need to dare make the change. We need to go into the agricultural businesses and say, hey, you don't work in a sustainable way, we need to help you. For the Danish farmers, for example, I mean, they have debt which is enormous because there's been a system that encourages them to borrow more money, borrow more money, borrow more money. Instead of saying, then, okay, how can we go out and invest in some of these farms and say, okay, I mean, instead of you borrowing so much money from the banks, maybe we from the state can go in and do some of these loans and then maybe cut them up in smaller pieces so you don't stand with such a big area yourself. So we need to dare to do some quite dramatic things. But that also means that we need to develop or redevelop our belief in a common collective or common way of solving things and not being on. I mean, it's not that we should be. For me, it's not a question about being communist society or something like that, but coming together and solve the things.
Of course.
I mean, as the clever individuals we are, with our personal freedom, but still, let's come together and try and solve this thing. But it is a change we're seeing right now. People, I think, have to understand that the idea of having big companies has employed thousands and thousands of people, and that makes a whole state grow. I mean, going on like, I mean, I know in some American states you have these huge companies, or you had car industry, for example, and that was running the whole economy. We're no longer there. It's a change in economics and systems, and people have to understand that we are in transition.
And that's why I think you guys are right on when it comes to universal basic income, because I think that would definitely help a lot of poor rural voters in the U.S. sustain this transition. And that's why I think I don't have direct access to the Social Democratic mayor here, but if you did, I would say ask him to create a test in Aarhus to start universal basic income. I mean, they're doing it in Finland, in Canada. You know?
But the funny thing is here in Denmark, I mean, we're discussing it a lot in the party. We don't have this fixed model of doing it. We're saying we need to experiment. But when you talk to Red Green Alliance, they don't like that. Social Democrats don't like it. Socialist People's Party don't like it. I mean, actually, because they're scared because they have the way of thinking that we have one system which is good. And we need to cater for that and make that better. And what we're saying basically is, let's change that system.
Yeah, I mean,
let's rethink it.
And I think a lot of conservatives would get on board as well.
Both
the negative income tax, like Friedman proposed.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different models of doing it, but time calls for radical change. Right
Agreed.
Now. And I think that we will be losing if we don't do it.
Yeah, it's and when you realize that people, especially, have been sold this. I mean, with Brexit and Trump, they've been sold this set of lies to convince them that globalization can somehow be reversed, and that mechanization and automation aren't going to come and take their work. I mean, it's absolutely essential, and I think it's
essential. And I mean, basically, it's also I heard a speech by Bill Gates saying, I mean, we have to talk about how do we tax robots, for example.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to look at. I mean, in Europe right now, we're starting the negotiations of the new media law in Denmark right now. And we have to look at how do we get money out of Facebook. Because we need production in Danish in Denmark, and they're taking all the advertising money.
Yeah, they are.
So we need to find out a way, how do we still keep as a small language area, we need to sustain a production in Danish, of drama, of news, of everything. How do we sustain that? And it has to be new ways of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, Clinton said that one of the reasons why she fell back on universal basic income was because it would require more extraction of fossil fuels to pay for it. And I don't think that is necessarily the case, and we should investigate it. Maybe this will be my last question to you, because I know you're probably pressed for time, but okay, so with all of these proposals, this is the cliched argument you always hear from the right, which is Denmark's a small country, a homogenous country. We look around us in Aarhus, I see a diversity of people. Do you believe that this model of governance can be exported abroad? Is it possible? Can be brought to other countries? Can it be made on a larger scale, like the United States?
Of course. I mean, I don't see why not. I mean, but also you have to understand that the way we have organized our society is perhaps not the best. This is one way of doing it. I want to see change here. So I don't think the US should be so much in love with Scandinavia just to copy it. I mean, come up with your own solutions.
Agreed.
But what you can learn here is it's actually possible to create a society where equality is actually one of the aims. Right now we're working in the wrong direction. That's what you have to understand. It's quite, even though when you look at all these Gini statistics, Denmark is very equal and so good. But what you've seen in the last 15 years is just inequality, just growing little by little. And that creates tensions.
Yes.
Because one thing that good social welfare, good healthcare, free education has created in our society in Denmark up through from it actually was in 30s and 50s, 60s and so forth. It's also a very peaceful country, and that is good also when you want to grow. It's good to not be scared walking down the street.
Yes.
It's good not to have gated communities.
Yes,
it's good to actually have a common school where people, I mean, both the CEO's son and the unemployed son meet each other and go to school together.
Yeah, I completely agree.
But it shouldn't be done, as I see it, as charity. And that's a good thing about our society is it's not a charitable system. It's based on rights.
And I think we need to learn that too.
And I think really that's something not to see it as like giving something to someone. No, we all have rights. We have the right when we grow up to have possibilities. We're not the same. I don't look at a society where we all are doing the same thing, but we have rights to be able to do the same things.
Well, with that said, the 2018 elections are coming up. It would be lovely to have your support with Bernie Sanders.
He sounds clever.
Well, I'm attempting to. But people like Bernie Sanders, I think we can really find common cause.
We can. I mean, Uffe, our political leader, have had a few meetings with Bernie. And
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, well then, thank you very much, and Rasmus, this is a sincere pleasure.
It was.
Okay.